Hello, what's going on? Is yours truly, Dr. Barry Pierre, your favorite board certified internist, founder of drbarrypr.com, as well as the host of the Lunch Learn with Dr. Barry podcast, more importantly, host of the Medicine Mondays. And I am here to bring you an amazing message. And what I really want this message to do for you guys is, because this is a question I've gotten quite often, pretty much since really the month of December, but really much since COVID started, but definitely in the month of December when treatment and vaccine started coming out, is like, how are they able to get this vaccine out so quickly? Right? That's a, common concern that I'm getting from a lot of people who want to be informed on the vaccine, want to be informed on treatment, but they're a little skeptical. They're a little concerned. Right. So they how did they get this vaccine out so quickly? And I have dubbed this message the perfect storm. Why is it the perfect storm? Because a lot of things had to happen for a treatment, especially of COVID-19, a treatment vaccine wise to come out as quote unquote quickly as it did. So before I start, the discussion, I want to kind of ease some concerns. The vaccine did not come out quickly. This is not something that was rushed, because sometimes when you hear quickly, you hear rushed. And if you hear rushed, you think it may not be as good. That is not the case, right? It was what I'm dubbing, right, the perfect storm. Maybe I'll have some lightning, sounds or something come around when I finish post recording this. A lot of things had to happen for us to get to this point. For again, it not even a little bit over a year before. Not really, actually, it was, especially from treatment course, a little under a year for a vaccine, to kind of come out and come to treatment, right? So, I want you guys to be able to, again, bookmark this, save this, favorite it, do whatever you need to do, because you're going to hear this question a lot. And I want you to be able to kind of reference something. I want you to be able to say no. I heard Dr. Barry call this the perfect storm. I need you to listen to this. I need you to watch this. And, after you listen and watch it, I think you're going to kind of understand, right? Because again, I understand the concern, right? I understand, the hesitancy, behind a new vaccine, a new treatment course coming out, and you having questions, right? Again, when here on the Lunch and Learn with Dr. Barry, the goal is to empower yourself with better health, right? So I want you to be empowered with correct knowledge, right? So we're gonna be going through, right, a couple things, again, a little more than a couple things that had to occur for us to get to this point. And then as a bonus, right, I love to give you guys as much as I can, right? As a bonus, I'm also going to answer the question that I usually get it usually gets sandwiched on top of it. Like how are they able to get this vaccine out so quickly, but there's no vaccine for HIV, right? Which is another virus. And we're going to talk about that, as well too, right? So we're going to hit the perfect storm, right? Really answering the simple, I call it a quote unquote simple explanation on how did the COVID-19 vaccine come out so fast, right? And then, right, as a bonus, I'm going to end off in saying, hey, this is why we also don't have an HIV vaccine, right? Because I get that question kind of asked as a combined question a lot. So, first and foremost, again, yours truly, Dr. Barry. Again, I appreciate you guys for checking me out. And make sure, again, share this with a friend. Share this with 10 friends, right, who has questions, who has concerns. And first of all, don't dismiss their concerns, right? And we've been trying to really drive home this fact. We're not here to dismiss anyone's concerns. If you're concerned about COVID, you're concerned about the treatment, you heard, the vaccines getting paused left or if you're concerned, I want you to be concerned and then be able to find the correct knowledge out there to become empowered on yourself, right? So, let's start, right? So we talk about the perfect storm, right? So I kind of dub this in different phases, right? To kind of ease you in to what's kind of going on here, right? So let's talk about part one, right? Which is I call the history of the mRNA vaccine, right? Because especially when we talk about, vaccines coming out quickly, they're usually mentioning and referring to Moderna and Pfizer, which are two of the vaccines that were able to be used for emergency use in December, right? Which again, a little bit less than a year since our first documented diagnosis, and really it's about 10, 11 months if you want to kind of get really nitpicky about it. But let's talk about the history of mRNA vaccines. So first of all, these vaccines have been studied since the 1990s, right? So you're going to hear a lot of people say oh, these vaccines came out of nowhere, and why is this the first time using it? No, they've actually been studied on several different diseases: the flu, Zika virus, rabies, CMV, cytomegalovirus, they've been studied on it. They've never been studied on humans, but we have been studying these types of vaccines for certain viruses in the past, again, since the 1990s, which is about 2 decades. And an mRNA vaccine is a copy of a natural chemical, uses a copy of a natural chemical called messenger RNA to produce an immune response, right? So again, that's how these vaccines work, right? Again, they use this mRNA, which is why we call this the messenger vaccines, right? They use this copy to help your body produce it. I've always kind of dubbed it as the playbook. It kind of gives you the playbook to say, hey, if something like this comes around, this is how you're going to fight it. AKA, if you see COVID come around, this is what I want you to do to be able to fight that COVID. And what's happened really since the 1990s that's really got us to this point where, like I said, a lot of things had to happen. But what's happened really, and again, just look around, technological advances have allowed for the ability for us to use these mRNA vaccines. Because before, reason why we couldn't use them was because it was they were too let's call it brittle, right? And so we're not gonna get down too nitty gritty on the scientific terms, but let's just say they were too brittle, too unstable to be able to kind of carry that message that we need over and then transfer it to a human body. We couldn't do that in the 1990s. But guess what, right? This is 2021, right? Or we'll even rewind it to 2020. We have a lot of technological advances that have occurred since that time that's allowed us to be able to say, you know what? I think we could use mRNA vaccines. And, first of all, again, especially when we think about where obviously the highlight is the COVID vaccine, but trust me, the success that they've had with the COVID vaccine, and now that our technological advances have kind of caught up, you best believe they're definitely going to use it for other different types of viruses and just infections in general. And I wanted to definitely add on to this point. They do not alter DNA, right? I'm not sure where that came from. I'm not sure what website, what book someone might have read that said like, oh no, if they give us an mRNA vaccine, and I think it's because they read the NA, like mRNA, DNA, and they read that and they think somehow it changes our DNA. It does not do that whatsoever. Again, we're not gonna get scientific on here because y'all don't come to me for the scientific mumbo jumbo, right? Y'all just come to me to kind of explain it as simple as possible. Like, it does not do that. You do not have to worry. No DNA, no infertility, nothing is going to happen using this vaccine here, right? So that's really part one, right? Because I want us to kind of get that background structure before we kind of move forward. So birth to part two, right? I call it like the birth of a deadly virus, right? So COVID-19 first identified in Wuhan, China in December of 2019. It was found to be able to be spread through respiratory droplets, when people cough, when they sneeze, when they talked. And it has an incubation period of 2 to 14 days before symptoms occur. What does that mean? That you could have COVID for up to 2 weeks before you have any symptoms. And why is that a problem? The reason why it's a problem is because you can be spreading and giving out COVID to other people for 2 weeks before you even realize you're doing it. And that's an issue, because you have a disease, right, that spreads just by us talking, by us sneezing, by us coughing. And now I can spend 2 weeks before it causes a problem. And we already know it's a deadly virus. But the problem is, like, you have some viruses in the past where they spread quickly, but you're symptomatic very quickly. So like, oh, hold on, like you gotten sick after this in 2 days. Let me quarantine you. Let me do something like that. But if 2 weeks go by and I don't know you have a disease, I can't quarantine that. So what does that mean? That means one person could go around affecting hundreds of people and subsequently thousands of people without even knowing it within a 2 week span, right? So you had this deadly virus that, again, discovered in Wuhan, China in December 19. We already had our first case in January 21st here in the United States, and by March 11th was declared a pandemic, means this is worldwide. That is how quickly this thing spread. Because again, someone had it, right, but didn't realize they had it. They went to travel, they went to talk, they went to families, they went to parties, they went to clubs, they did everything they needed to do. And then next thing you know, a whole bunch more people have it, and a whole bunch more people are spreading it unknowing. So, right? So you have this birth of a deadly virus that spreads to a lot of people, spreads quickly, but you don't get symptomatic from it, right? So again, when I talk about the recipe of a perfect storm, this is definitely it. So let's go to part 3, right? So we're moving on. So now we've got this virus that's now everywhere. Again, March 11th, pandemic status, right? It's worldwide, global problems. Now, what does that mean when it causes a problem? Public health emergency across several countries began to occur, right? And again, you guys know I'm a public health, obviously I'm pro, I have a degree in public health, right? So obviously I'm pro public health, but we started noticing that now we had hospitals being overrun, health systems being overran, because the amount of people who, again, were now getting sick, they were coming in the bunches. And guess what? We weren't ready for them, right? Like here in the United States, a lot of our initial talk was slow the curve. Reason why we had to slow the curve is because we knew we did not have the supply to meet up with the demand that we were seeing across the globe. And that's what was occurring. There's people dying because they didn't have a chance and didn't have access to the healthcare system. Not as if the healthcare system wasn't good. It's just like, no, like if you need a vent to breathe and I only have 10 vents, but 20 people come to see me, guess what? 10 of those people aren't going to make it. And that's what was happening across the world, even here in the United States, right? We had a supply and demand issue because now you had this virus, this deadly virus that, again, because it incubates after 2 to 14 days, we don't even know about it. And because we don't even know about it, guess what? Now tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people have this virus, and then the numbers kind of shot up through the roof, right? And if you may say, okay, yes, some hospitals overrun. Trust me, no, hospitals across the world were being overrun to the point where now financial markets were crashing. I know I got some financial folks who follow me and listen to the podcast or watch me on the YouTube channel. Financial markets were crashing in March. Everything was hitting all-time lows, right? Because here you had this pandemic virus that was essentially shutting everything down. Because now governments had to do something. So they started instilling travel bans. They started, doing restrictions. You had some countries like, no, if you're from this country, you can't come here. If you're from that country, you can't come here. Or no, if you're in this country, you can't leave. Oh, even worse, hey, if you're in this city, you can't leave your house. All right. Again, my VA, she's from the Philippines, and they had a probationary period where only one person was allowed to leave outside the house every 3 days, right? This is the reality that we were facing with this, again, quote unquote, perfect storm associated with COVID. So we had some problems. We had some concerns that we really need to deal with. So again, you have this government travel bans, you had restrictions, financial markets crashing, you had hospitals being overran, problems galore. And then you have this issue where the support, right, for having some type of, lifeboat is at an all-time high. Like I said, and again, it usually does not occur. Again, that's why, ladies and gentlemen, when you hear the phrase, oh, this vaccine came out of nowhere. No. It did not come out of nowhere. There was a lot of people who were looking and begging and pleading for some type of help because you had all of these issues that were occurring. So I like to call this phase kind of the different way of life, because people had to adjust, right? They had to adjust to a new way of life. They had to adjust there's some parts of the country, of the world, where they always wore masks. It wasn't an issue. But especially here in the United States, you had people who are like, I gotta wear a mask everywhere I go, or I can't even go into the grocery store. I can't even go into the mall. I can't even I can't even do normal things that I used to be able to do unless I have this mask on. Right. So this was a way of life. And not only masks, you couldn't go to school. Your kids couldn't go to school. And that's if these things were even open. You had large events, sports conferences, sports, leagues, playoffs, medical schools just in general being closed and saying, you know what? We're doing virtual. Everything's going virtual because the risk of getting people in one confined room and having one person, again, like I said, in 2 to 14 days, one person spread that out to the world was too high. And you had colleges shutting down left and right because they're like, no, we can't do it. High schools, middle schools, elementary schools, like, no, we cannot do this. And, as you see, when this is occurring, you had job sectors being forced out of work because they couldn't go to work. Again, I'm a physician. I work in the hospital setting. But I had my friends who were surgeons who couldn't do surgery because the hospital wouldn't let them do surgery. You had states that are saying like, no, if you have in a building, you need to shut that down, right? Like, so imagine going to school all this time and, working with your hands and the need to do that. And all of a sudden you can't do anything, right? Because you had this virus, right, that it was out of your control, not even allowing you to work. Like, that was like reality for a lot of people, which is still is reality for some people. I say burnout, depression, all times high, right? Because again, people aren't working anymore. Financial markets crashing, travel bans, people having to wear masks, people having to stay home, like all these things that people were just not used to in such a short period of time. Remember, the first case was found in December 2019. We had pandemic status by March, right? Less than 4 months, right? Pandemic status. This is a problem people were not ready for, to the point where we had anti-mask rallies. Like, imagine this craziness, right? Again, I kind of blame folks, right? But imagine being so disheartened, being so, burnt out, being so depressed by this virus that's pandemic level, that's killing people, that's spreading to everywhere, that you say, you know what, enough is enough. I'm not wearing a mask, right? Like, people were so, people were so out of touch, right? And they were so upset that their way of life and their control was gone. They're like, no, I'm going to protest against wearing a mask. Even though wearing a mask was saving their life, they're like, you know what? I'd rather take the risk of getting this deadly virus. And unfortunately, a lot of people did, and a lot of people died from it, right? But I'd rather take the risk of not wearing a mask and protest my right not to wear this mask than do it. And this was happening. We definitely saw a lot of it here in the United States, but definitely happening worldwide as well too, in that regard, right? So again, that different way of life was a shock for a lot of people. But guess what? Help was on the way, right? This is that, again, we're talking about this recipe of help on the perfect storm, right? Help began on the way because you started seeing resources for not only testing, for treating, and everything alike. All of a sudden, you had all of these countries and private corporations, public corporations banding together to say, hey, we need to do something, right? Because, you know what? Like, my country can't be locked down forever. We need to do something to, quote unquote, you heard the term open back up, right? So you had governments across the world, corporations across the world, pharmaceutical companies across the world teaming up to say, like, what can we do together to get to the point where, you know what, let's quote unquote open this back up again and get to our normal way of life. Because clearly a different way of life was not the way people were going to be adjusting, right? It just wasn't going to happen. Research studies began, and then at a point, right? And this is why I always caution the people who think like it came out of nowhere. When we typically, in a typical study, right? When I'm typically doing a medical study, a lot of times the amount of work that it takes to get enough volunteers or people who want to be in said study just to see, does this treatment work or not, usually takes a long time. Right. A lot of times it takes a long time because we don't have enough people. Right. So we have to kind of go out and go worldwide. We have to go to these different parts of the area just to get enough people to make sure our numbers make sense. But guess what happened in COVID that we didn't have to worry about? We didn't have to worry about a whole bunch of people, getting, if we didn't have to worry about whether a whole bunch of people had this disease or whether a whole bunch of people were going to join these studies. That was not the case. Right. You had some studies, Moderna were like close to 40,000, Pfizer close to 30,000, kind of vice versa. Like you had plenty of people who couldn't wait to join these studies. They're probably part of those anti-mask. Some of them were probably part of those anti-mask rallies. They couldn't wait to join like these studies. So again, now all of a sudden when I'm doing a study, and it used to take me a long time just to get my numbers up as far as the people who really were willing to be a part of the study. Now that was not the case. And it was not the case worldwide. So you had your studies being filled up. You had governments and corporations and pharmaceutical companies being, funded, right? And I talk about the government's support worldwide for research like never before, because financial support was huge. You had countries say, hey, you know what? If you work on developing this medication, this vaccine, we will buy that from you. In fact, you know what? We're not even going to wait to see if it completely works. We'll front you some money just to go through the studies. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you that that does not occur. right? You don't have government saying like, we'll pay for it even if it doesn't work. A lot of times these private companies are the ones who usually have to take the financial risk on their own. But now you had these governments saying like, you know what? Like, we'll pay for you. You don't have to worry about it. Come on, like this is simple, right? Of course, you're telling me I can do my study, I can do the numbers, I got plenty of people who are willing to volunteer for me, and even if it doesn't work, you're still gonna pay me for it anyways. Yeah, we'll sign up for that. So again, a lot of things had to occur, but a lot of things occurred again that were like in the positive direction for COVID-19. And then the welcome party, right? Like, I guess, when I say the welcome party, it's more like, hey, all of a sudden, come, December, right? Come January, December, all of a sudden you had two of the two main ones, especially when we talk about the mRNA vaccine types, right? You had two main ones, Moderna and Pfizer, that were authorized, right? Like, all of that stuff that I've been talking about this whole time, all of that stuff had to happen for us to be able to get a vaccine out to enough people, right? And for us, obviously, for us to show that it's safe. And again, let me hype on and focus on that safetyness, because I think a lot of people, when they hear, it came out quickly, they thought that we had to skip steps. Let me tell you, we didn't have to skip a single step. In fact, especially when you got people like me on the medical side, we were not going to allow them to skip a single step, right? The way that they would normally work to get a vaccine, to get a medication, to get a treatment out, they had to do all of those steps. But guess what? A lot of those steps got sped up, right? Technology allowed these mRNA vaccine types to get sped up. The fact that everybody in the whole world almost had COVID allowed us to get a lot of people with COVID. The fact that government support was there financially allowed these pharmaceutical companies to be able to kind of crank these medications out. But trust me, they had to go through every single step of the way to get it. And again, there's 4 phases. Again, we're not going to focus on the 4 phases of research and how you get a medication out. If you want, drop me in the comments, hit me in the DMs, email, whatever. Say, hey, I want to hear about those 4 phases, and I'll definitely educate you on those. But that's not neither here or now. It's about, hey, what did we have to do to get to this point? All of that that I was just mentioning, that I've been talking about this whole time, all of that stuff had to occur for us to get to the point where, you know what? We've had enough people in our study. We see the results. The technology is there. We're ready to go. Right, like that, and that was the beauty of medication and medicine and technology, and just unfortunately everything coming together, at the right time. So you had phenomenal success rates in avoiding the severe illness associated with COVID, especially with these 2 vaccines from Moderna and Pfizer. And again, when I say avoiding severe illness, like that was the main goal, because it's one thing to get COVID-19. Again, at the time I'm recording this, about 140 million, give or take, have COVID. This is worldwide. And about 3 million, a little bit over, have died from COVID, right? So, and again, that doesn't talk about a lot of the, post-COVID related issues that I think we're going to have to really, have a discussion with either sooner rather than later, especially because we're going on a little bit of a year out, and we're starting to see, a lot of these people who quote unquote survive from COVID still dealing with lingering issues that they never had to deal with. I was watching, I think it was ESPN, and they talked about how one of the NBA basketball players who had COVID still needs to use an inhaler before games, right? And this is a premier fit NBA athlete, right, who has to now use an inhaler before every game to make sure he's breathing correctly, right? Like we're gonna have a long discussion, and I think the numbers are still there. They're still kind of coming up. We're gonna have a long discussion about that, but that's again neither here nor there. But again, we had the studies, we had everything happening. A whole bunch of people got it. Money poured in, technological advances, and here we are. And again, when I think the welcome party of the need to get back to normal, I think that's what kept pushing people, right, to want to get this treatment out. And fortunately, it's been received very well. You see, again, I don't have to tell you, you're starting to see, countries open up again. People are planning to take trips. People are getting back on airplanes again. Again, remember, it got so bad, people stopped flying, right? It was that scary of a time. Right? People stopped doing their normal. They stopped traveling. That's what's the scary about everything else. I think some people kind of put off how bad it really was, right? Especially March, April, May, of 2020. I think they put off how bad it really was. because now that we have treatments, they're like, oh, whoa, that came out kind of fast. No, it didn't. It really didn't come out fast. Especially if you listen to me talking today, right? It didn't really come out fast. Just everything that had to happen, occurred in our regards, right? So that's it, right? That's what I call the perfect storm. So again, ladies and gentlemen, especially my Lunch and Learn community, whoever's listening, whoever's watching, when you hear someone say that, I want you to be able to, again, make sure you have this video or this audio bookmark saved somewhere that you can quickly send it to them, right? Because they're going to want to hear it. They're going to want to see the step-by-step breakup. And that's what we're here for, to kind of help them out. And before I go, right, I said I'm going to give you a bonus, right? Because typically when I hear how did you get the vaccine out so quickly? Someone will always follow up with, well, why is there no HIV vaccine, right? So let's just break out the numbers again. Let's talk about HIV. Since the HIV was, first kind of discovered per se, in the mid 1970s. As we speak at this time, 2021, we have about 38 million people worldwide affected with HIV. 38 million. Again, I just kind of mentioned it before. COVID-19 in a little over a year has affected 140 million people, right? With about 3 of them, right, passing away, right? Which means COVID-19, people who have been diagnosed with COVID-19, 137 million, almost 100 more million people have COVID-19 in 1 year. Right. And I think we have to stress this. In 1 year, COVID-19 has affected over 100 more million people than has HIV. Right. More people are living in this world with COVID-19. Again, we'll just say about 137-ish. 137 million folks have been affected or are living with COVID-19 worldwide as we speak versus the 38 million. Right. So we already have a numbers disadvantage right off the bat. Right. And what happens when we have that numbers disadvantage? Again, just, remember what we talked about here, right? If you have this number disadvantage, HIV wasn't shutting down global markets, right? HIV wasn't shutting down financial markets. HIV wasn't causing travel bans. HIV is not doing that, right? So what does that mean? You're having less government support to try to fight it because it's not really messing with them. Right. So if you have less government support, that means you have less financial support, which means that one of these pharmaceutical companies are going to have to come out their own pocket, right, and pay for the treatment or the supposed treatment, which is the vaccine. So, and these are some other things that we really need to make sure we drive home when we think about HIV. There is no natural immunity to HIV. Again, you can get COVID-19 and live. Right. And your body will develop some antibodies and be able to kind of get you over that hump. I know a lot of people, especially in a hospital setting where they get COVID-19, but they come into the hospital for something else. And we just happen to diagnose them with COVID-19. They're completely asymptomatic. Right. A lot of people are walking around in this world with COVID-19 who have no clue they actually have COVID-19. That's the reality, because your body can fight that. Your body can't fight HIV. If you get HIV, right, you are not going to win. Right. Like there's no immunity, like, because HIV is a bad viral bug. Right. It does not play when it comes to immunosuppression. Right. You are not winning that fight against HIV drinking tea, or like, that's just not happening. Right. There's a lot of variability associated with HIV types, right? Which again, and we've talked about some of the variants associated with COVID-19 in the past episodes. So we know there's some concern there, but the same thing happens in HIV. We don't know if there's a correlation of protective immunity, right? Like, how would we be able to diagnose that? How would we be able to treat that? We're not even sure yet. And so far, again, and I talked about, I kind of mentioned how even with COVID-19, even though financial markets were shutting down, we still made sure they went through all of these steps, right? All of the safety trials, right? The 4 different phases, right? Here, I kind of mentioned how the lack of animal model that reliably predicts vaccine efficacy in humans, right? So like, they can't even get through like the first phase of a treatment plan, especially from a scientific standpoint, before they're even testing it on humans, right? Like, that's just not it, right? So that's why when you hear, and all of the things I mentioned, like, COVID-19 has shown, right? We have a natural immunity to COVID-19. We see the variability, but we see it's not as extensive as HIV, right? We know that there's some protective immunity associated, right? If you happen to get COVID-19, we know all the things, and we definitely have plenty of research that shows the efficacy in humans, right? Like, so all of these things that COVID-19 has, HIV doesn't, right? So when you hear, again, I wanted to make sure I hit y'all with that bonus. When you hear, hey, what about the HIV vaccine? When is that coming out? That is why the HIV vaccine is not coming out. Now, then, that's not saying that people aren't working on trying to treat it. It just means that you should not expect to see it within a year. It just, because again, the motivation just isn't the same. Right. And again, I don't want us to be disingenuous when we think that, like, oh, if I came out with a COVID-19 vaccine, I should be able to drop a HIV vaccine next week. No. That is not the case. Again, and when you listen to Lunch and Learn, when you're in the Lunch and Learn community, you know that you're not going to be misguided, right, by blog posts or people just kind of like saying crazy stuff. Like, that's just not the case here, right? So again, I appreciate everyone, right, who DMs me, emails me, ask questions, leave comments on the YouTube page. Again, remember, if you're not already subscribed, make sure you subscribe to both my YouTube channels, Dr. Pierre's Health Checks as well as Dr. Pierre TV. I will leave the links in the show notes to make sure we're together, right? Like, make sure you subscribe, press the button wherever you're at, right? Subscribe to the podcast as well too, right? Leave us a 5-star review. Let us know how we're doing. And again, you guys be blessed, be safe, wear your mask, get your vaccine when you can get your vaccine. And I'm going to see you guys next week.